Hey, we did it. We won. Who won? Thinking humans, hopefully. Well, if you realize where we are, this is mostly hairless apes. And we're on our evolutionary journey here in the Evolving Church of Science. I'm Dr. Gene Mesco, talking to you on January 15th. Going, and I just realized, well, I've talked about this before, but you know what? There's so many battles in life. There's the famous battle of the sexes, males and females, and then there's all this fun intersex stuff. And there's left versus right, and there's gay versus straight, and there's black versus white, there's blue versus red, and there's all of this crap that we've been fed by the corporate media for so long. And the real problem, as it's ever been, is up versus down. It's big. It's big versus small. It's power and money and ruling classes. And fear versus thinking. That's the biggest distinction that needs to be made. Oh, a few hundred years ago, some snappy scientists decided to call us wise humans. We talk about humans in the evolutionary fossil record going all the way back to our fellow hominids, Homo erectus and Homo habilis, and Homo neanderthalensis, and Homo sapiens. And we're the wise humans, supposedly, that we can think, because we actually figured out how to build global civilizations. We'd been building civilizations for thousands of years. We just had societies for a while. We had small civilizations. We had hunter-gatherers. And they all had their own rules. And we came up with gods because we had ignorance. We had ignorance about how the world worked. And so we created gods to calm us, to give us a break in the record. And then when we had those deities, people realized they could manipulate us. Because if there was ignorance, God, by definition, if you've got a religion, if you've got a God that says, we don't know this, we don't know what's going on, but we think there's somebody out there who controls the lightning or the rain or the harvest or everything. That was a big leap away from the pantheons to monotheism. It's no coincidence that nomadic desert people came up with monotheism. And it grew out of the Middle Eastern tribes who had moved, humans who arguably had moved into some of the harshest climates. I mean, think about trying to survive in a desert environment as opposed to a nice jungle or countryside or tropical or temperate forest where there's lots of stuff to eat and lots of places to do. Whereas in a desert environment, there's not much. There's one way to do it. You got to get to the next oasis. You got to get to the coast. You got to get to the river, whatever it is. So it's no wonder that the people who came up with monotheism were those nomadic desert tribes. After we'd moved around and then we settled in and we figured out agriculture. And we said, hey, this works. This is way better than wandering through the desert for years. We've got agriculture. We can grow things. We can farm things. And we can control things. And we can make beer and wine. But we still don't know how a whole bunch of stuff works. But once we figured out how stuff worked and we organized ourselves, there were always those people who decided that they should be in charge. And we acknowledge. I like to acknowledge my favorite story about bosses comes from biology, of course. And it's the story of when all the body parts argued about who was boss. And the body parts argued, and the eyes said we could see everything, and the brain said we think about stuff, and the hand said we manipulate everything, and the legs said we take you everywhere. And the anus spoke up. The asshole spoke up and said, I should be in charge. And everyone laughed at the anus. And the anus shut down, and the body became constipated, and wastes couldn't be removed. And things got all backed up, and the eyes got teary, and the brain got foggy, and the hands got shaky, and the legs got wobbly, and they all said, all right, we give up. Please get rid of the waste. Please manage the system. And that was the initial job of leadership, dealing with the dirty job. After years of working in bureaucracies, I realized the best administrators are the ones who face outward, the ones who actually protect the group, the ones who deal with all the bureaucratic bullshit and let it pile up on their desk so that you can do your job. That's a good administrator. That's a good leader. As the leader takes the hit. But that's not what we have today. That's not what we've evolved into. The people who were taking the hits would get praised, would get rewarded, would get better compensation. They might have first dibs at the kill or the best pick of the crops. And we were okay with that. They're doing a dirty job, and they should get a little perk for it. But that little perk over the millennia has morphed into excessive perks, excessive wealth, aristocracy, kings and queens, and CEOs and popes and corporate chief executive officers, and all of this bullshit that has built these hierarchical systems, which says, oh, we have to manage this, and it's not them managing. It's no longer bottom up. That's what's functional. That's what's functional for humans. Is we all do our thing, government of, by, and for the people, which we tried to capture 250 years ago. And we said government of, by, and for the people is what we want. We're going to do our jobs. We're going to keep the troop alive. And the leader needs to just be the one that actually sorts out the information that we all have, that we all share, and helps us make a decision, helps steer us in the right direction. And is the first one into battle, is the first one leading the charge against the marauding invaders or the tribe of bearcats or whatever is coming at us. And we can deal with that. We can deal with that beautifully. And you want the leader out there. You love your leader for that. But that's not what we have now. Now we have a whole bunch of assholes. The terrible tangerine, the marauding mango, whatever you want to call him. But we've got them elsewhere too. They're everywhere. And they think they're so big, they think they're what it's all about. And it's not about us. It's not about all of us. And that's why we're going to win. That's why we're going to win. It's because enough people are going to gather this idea. They're going to get this idea in their heads. That the problem isn't all this horizontal crap that they feed at us. Gay, straight, transsexual, who gives a shit? Who frickin' cares? Who has sex with who? They don't care. They have sex with children. They have sex with women that they can dominate, or men. I don't know what they're doing with animals. I don't know what the fuck they're doing. And I don't care. If you want to go off into some corner and do that, but if you're leading, if you're supposed to be the leader, then you got to show us that you're in the game for us. And that is the last thing that any of these assholes are showing us. They are giving away the farm to millionaires, to all their fellow billionaires. And they're buying weapons so they can make us all afraid. And they're blowing stuff up. And they're not building anything. They're not directing anything that's worthwhile. All they're worried about is getting more for them. And it's enough. It's stop. Stop it. We all need to step up and stop it. And so the main philosophy that we can all use for this, to win the game, is to look around and say, I don't give a shit about them anymore. I'm going to use Amazon as little as possible. I'm going to use Google as little as possible. I'm going to shop local. I'm going to buy local. I'm going to create community again as much as I can. Think global, but act local. And all of us need to shy away and shut down the big giants and say, no, I am no longer paying you whatever subscription fees or whatever else. It's time to starve the beast, because that's what we've created. We have created these monsters, these beasts of large social entities, corporations, nation states, churches, all of these huge things that we can step away from if we bother to step back and think, and which is the essence of science, which is why I promote the Evolving Church of Science, which has no leadership, which has no pope. It has professionals. It has professionals in different fields who acknowledge the reality of reality, that our shared reality is the only thing we can work with, what we can measure. Because that's what science does. That's all science does. It observes, it measures, it collects data, and then it tries to look for rules. And we call those things theories. Because we acknowledge at a fundamental level we might be wrong. That's the big difference between science and religious faith. And that's why science has been arguing with religion, because what enabled this age of colonialism we're in is science. When the Portuguese figured out navigation and sailing mechanics and how to maneuver big ships that could actually circumnavigate the globe, countries were ready to take over places. 500 years ago, we first sailed around the globe. And the Spaniards and the Portuguese did that, and that was the first big global empire, the Spaniards actually. But what did they do? They ran out of money. They got fat and lazy. And the English kicked their ass. That's a lot of help from the weather, if you go back to 1588 and the Battle for the Spanish Armada. But then what happened next is the English took over. So all through the 1600s, everybody got in the game. And the Spaniards were still doing it. The English started doing it. The French were doing it. The Germans got in the game. The Italians, the Dutch, the Portuguese. Everybody was sailing around. This information got out. And because knowledge doesn't owned by anyone. Knowledge is all of ours. You can only hold on to secrets so long. And that's why it's secretive. That's why it got secret and people started hoarding information. They tried to keep it to themselves. But you can't do that. Information is the essence of life. That's what evolution tells us. You got to be organized. You got to stay together. That's the only way you can beat entropy and stay alive in the world. Biology's done it for billions of years by capturing information in molecular structures, and DNA and RNA and protein and cellular structures. And that's what was alive until whenever consciousness evolved. That's the thing we added to the game. That was the game changer. Thinking became the next big way to process information. We could think we could create ideas. We could create imaginary structures, which then we could turn into reality. If we put them on paper, if we wrote them down, if we talked about them, if we communicated the information, and we got a bunch of people to work on it, we could build these amazing social structures and physical structures, and we could change the planet because we could act out through our hands and build things and construct things. And that's who we are. We're tool-using, thinking apes, and we run the planet. And the people who run it best are professionals. That's why we've won. The professionals are eventually going to wake up. It might not happen tomorrow, might not happen next year, but it's happening all over. Professionals are waking up and they're looking around at assholes who've gotten in charge in different places. Let me ask you this. If you work in any sort of hierarchy, is there anything worse than working for a boss you don't respect? That is the absolute worst. And on the other side of that coin, there are a few things better than being involved in a group where you respect the leadership, where you agree that they're steering you in the right direction, and you'd kill for them if the case came to it, maybe. Well, that's what the military asked for. But we've also had fragging in the past. Yeah, there have been cases where people have rebelled against their leaders, and that's the whole point. That's what we should be doing. If a leader stops working, you got to kick him out and get a new one. But that's not what these guys want. They want to be permanent leaders. Leadership should be a temporary thing, just like life. Life is temporary, in case you haven't figured it out. Everything's temporary. The only thing that persists at the longer scale is the species, and that's why the only ethical choice is to promote the optimal development of as many humans as we can. Because keeping the species alive means that we persist. We have branched off of the tree of life, and we occupy our space in the world. And in that space in the world, we are the most amazing things on the planet. We are. Humans are amazing. We've become, purely for our information processing capacity. That's the deal. When you compare us in an evolutionary sense to anybody else, the essence of information, the essence of evolution is information. Information is what's required for life. If you don't have the ability to store information and figure out the shortcuts for matter and energy and space and time to beat entropy, you can't stay alive. And that's all biology does. That's what life does. And when we translate that to society, to social evolution, to artificial selection, the things we do with our brains when we think of these ideas and say, hey, I understand my biology is doing this, but my brain says we should be doing this. And we can overcome, we can hold our waste in for a little while. We can distribute it where we want. We can take it. We can monitor what we eat. We can change what we eat. We can change what we build. We can change what we grow. We don't have to just accept what the earth offers. We can manipulate it. We can bend plants and animals to our will. That's what domestication is. So in one sense, we have colonialism as a species because we dominate other species, and that's where all the animal rights activists and people step up. But until we figure out how to synthesize molecules from scratch in bulk quantities, then we can all eat out of squeeze tubes and leave the nature to go on with its Garden of Eden. We're going to manipulate it to our advantage. But that's the deal. We should be manipulating it to all of our advantages, to the human species. We should work as a team to get out there. But obviously, that's going to have to wait a while till we figure out what's the best way to govern that. And what the evolving Church of Science says is, all you can do is start small and run experiments and see what works. So, here's the call out. Here's how we win. We win by forming communities. Again, reforming our communities. And we cut the chaff. We get the wheat from the chaff. We harvest people who are useful or professional. We let professionals lead us. People who can operate in a given economy, who provide enough resources that they can share and help take care of us, who aren't quite as capable anymore. Because that's the deal. We have to build a civilization that accommodates the human lifespan. We have to build, and we had that for a while. We had families, we had tribes, we had clans, where you took care of the kids and you took care of the elders. But no, what have we done? We've been fragmented. We've been driven down by these individuals at the top who have climbed to the top of some social pyramid and gained power. And those people realize that they live for themselves. That's the whole thing, that the self is the most important thing as opposed to the group. And that's what's so wrong with the age of colonialism. And that's why it's coming to an end, because we've realized we have to go back to being a group. Because what we've done for years is said, oh, king and country, we're going to follow the king, we're going to follow that lead, and if we have to pay taxes or go to war, it's all about preserving the king. No, it needs to be about preserving the group. And we need managers, we need leaders to step up and say, hey, here's this problem. But managers and leaders should only be in place long enough to solve whatever problem they get elected for in the first place. They get pushed toward, or they step up and offer a solution. And if they're not fixing a problem, why the fuck should we listen to them? We need to have a reorganized civilization. And it needs to be based on communities of humans who take care of themselves, who take care of each other, from cradle to grave, from birth to death. We need to do that, because if we don't do it ourselves, it's going to be left to the market, to our ugly thing that we've evolved called capitalism, which says all that matters is how much resources you can control. And if I can control more resources, then I can share some of those with you at my discretion and get you to do different things because you don't have the resources. And that's why colonialism and imperialism is so ugly. Because these individuals who've moved away from the group, who've isolated themselves into their individual selves and said, I'm the most important thing because I'm worth $50 million a year. You can't begrudge them that. I mean, if I was a star athlete and I could move into a market where they're going to pay me $40 million a year to play football or basketball or baseball, hell, I would do it. Most people would do it. Even if I'm trading that off for a little arthritis, a little early arthritis and some joints maybe, way worth the payoff from an individual standpoint. But what some people are realizing is they're creating generational wealth. And that's what we need. We need generational wealth because a generation is a group. By definition, people have so much money that they're thinking about generational wealth now. And that's what we all need. Every group should be stabilized. How many groups should there be? I would argue for millions. With billions of people on the planet, I think we need millions of groups. But this is where we can run the most amazing experiment ever. We could run an experiment where we said, hey, let's rebuild our social groups that we had as hunter-gatherers 10,000 years ago, before we figured out agriculture, before we figured out how we had to live in a specific environment, because now we have to live in a global environment. And we each have to get our resources to manage our own group. And that's what happened over the years as people ran into each other. When there was enough, I don't know that there's evidence for this, but it's one hypothesis we can entertain. What drove the growth of civilizations, the expansion of social groups, was the idea that cooperation was beneficial. That for the longest time, let's take Dunbar's number and said, about 100, 200 people was the average group size. That's what we get from Aboriginal cultures. That's what we get from personality studies and sociology studies nowadays. That each one of us can only really process a few hundred relationships, a few hundred personal relationships. People that we actually know, people that you trust to a certain extent. Everybody else is just other people. But that doesn't mean that those people are worthless, because they're all doing their own things, and they're all coming up with their own ideas, and we don't know where the next good ideas are going to come from. Because what we learned from evolution is that diversity is a bonus. Diversity is a net plus. Right? If it gets too diverse, it'll correct itself. Things get too different, it'll branch off and form new species. Then maybe eventually humans will form different species. Maybe we will have descendants in the future. I hope we do. Because right now we're just a twig on the tree of life. We're a little branch that's been around for maybe a few 100,000 years as Homo sapiens. But that's nothing compared to the 3.5 billion years of life on Earth. The dinosaurs had to run for millions of years. I'd like to shoot for 1 million. That would be a really great target. If we can keep our species alive for 1 million years, that should be a goal. That's a long-term goal. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to expand it, because we're going to take our species and expand it. How are we going to do that? We're going to promote diversity. So we're going to limit group size. That's the only rule we should have, that big is bad. Big is bad. We probably started doing big way back when we figured out agriculture. And we said, oh, wait, we could support more people. We've got surplus food. We can trade with other groups. All right, we can actually get along. Because perhaps we started agriculture because we said, hey, you know what? Hunting-gathering is pretty hard. And sometimes there's lean times. Sometimes the animals might get sick, or the crop fails, or the harvest fails, or whatever it is, because then we haven't really planted anything. And the oldest temples, like Göbekli Tepe, tell us that people got together for harvest festivals and did stuff. And they started working together. And they realized that was better. There was more stuff going on. So we should interact. But we always have to take care of our own. And so we should only build bigger groups if you agree with their rules. So everybody start your own group. Start your own community. Get out there and build a community and decide what are the rules that you can live with. What are the rules? Does it matter if people are black or white or gay or straight or male or female, or what's going on? What's the right ratio for your group? I don't know. Nobody knows. That's the whole point. That's the beautiful experiment we should embark on. That's the evolutionary node we're at. A node is a branch point in the tree. And we can diverge right now. We can make a choice. We can actually do the start of perhaps a human speciation event. We can say we want to continue as Homo sapiens, or we want to go back to being apes. We want to go back to simple apes who follow a leader and do what they're told and don't think. And that's the evolutionary node we're at right now. And so if you want to think, if you want to solve your own problems, if you want to take charge of your own life, look around you, look at the whole global situation, and realize that the real problem is this capitalist imperialist system, which has been in place for a few centuries, and it promotes assholes. It promotes idiots who get so far removed from the common group, who have so many resources that they don't see reality the same way you do. And because they don't see reality the same way that you do, they're actually distanced from reality because they're in this amazingly artificial world. They're away from all the waste management flow of the plumbing systems and the dirt grinding agriculture of the feeding systems and the oily manufacturing floor of the industrial systems. Who manages all that? The professionals manage all that. The professionals do the work. They get in there and they do the work, and they keep this world working as all this modern world works. And they should receive the lion's share of the resources. Entertainers are great. We should pay athletes and actors money. Should they be making what they're making? No. Should CEOs be making what they're making? No. They're just glorified managers. If you can make the system run better, great. We need that. We need leaders. We need managers. We don't need big bosses who are so removed from reality that they can't see straight. They can't see reality. And subsequently what they do is make decisions for them, for themselves, and not for the group, because that's what real leaders do. Is they make decisions for the group. They help steer us in the right direction. And the ones that are in charge right now are steering us off a cliff. And so it's time to change direction. This is Dr. Gene Mesco signing off from Mostly Hairless Apes in the Evolving Church of Science.